Welcome to today's webinar, Beat Fleet Inflation, presented by Merchants Fleet. I'm Jay Cohen, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we will try to address them all. However, if we do not get to yours, don't worry, you will be contacted by email with a response after the event. Our presenters today are James Crocker, Vice President of Remarketing, Stefan Desaki, Senior Fleet Consultant, and Kristen Parche, Vice President of Finance. All of them are with Merchants Fleet. Now, I'll hand it over to our presenters.
Thank you, Jay, and good afternoon, everybody. Looking forward to speaking with you today about how to beat fleet inflation. But before we get there, let's talk about, what is the market doing now? And that's always a interesting question these days, I think, because what it's doing today may be very different from what it's doing tomorrow. And I think that really is the environment that we're living in today, is that, even though we're here to talk about inflation today, I think as we've all seen over the last couple of years, the economic challenges that we've all faced may be inflation today. It may be interest rate rising, tomorrow, or as we've been experiencing, in the market. And we're here today to talk to you about inflation in particular, but give you some tools to be looking at the market as a whole so that you can be prepared for any challenges that you may face in managing your fleet. So as we think about different market indicators to watch, there's really, as a finance professional here at Merchants, I'm interested in a multitude of various indicators and the effect that those indicators may have on our business, and those that may affect your business in different ways. So, 5 areas that we look at. We're certainly interested in the job market and what we're doing in our environment to add jobs into the market, as well as, watching unemployment rates. Interest rates are really certainly something that we want to keep an eye on, certainly from a yield curve perspective and where we're going in the future and how we think about that in a fixed rate market or versus a floating rate type structure. GDP and growth rate, how's the economy doing? That real core view of whether we're growing our economy and what segments that we're growing our economy in. We've all heard and are dealing with inflation on a daily basis. And in one of those areas where, inflation has taken hold and really translates is around, vehicles and remarketing values of vehicles. And, whether you're managing your fleet in our world, whether we're helping our customers manage their fleet or our clients manage their fleet, or we're partnering across the organization to help manage our own 30,000 unit fleet. We really keep an eye out, and I work with my partner here, James, on a regular basis on the remarketing values of our vehicles and our clients' vehicles. And so those are really 5 main indicators that we really look at across our organization and as finance professionals. And that really helps us in partnering with our fleet managers and our strategic management team and being able to think about, how we as an organization and how you as fleet managers can be thinking like a CFO or a finance professional, and what you can do to partner with your organization to drive opportunities within your fleet. So as we put on our, CFO hat, and we want to start thinking like that and partnering across the organization, one of the main things that, that I can advise or that I think about in my position every day is what are the short-term actions that I can take to affect, our bottom line, how we manage cash, how we optimize our assets, but keeping in mind as we as we make changes or take action within our organization, how do we make sure that we're keeping our eye on that long-term vision of where we're going strategically as a company? And so, some tips for all of you as you look to partner across the organization and kind of put your finance hat on. The first place that we like to think about and partner with our organization and our fleet management team around is revenue ultimately cures a lot of woes. And so if I think about, how can I drive optimizing my fleet and the financials around my organization, we always encourage you to think revenue first. You can only cut so many expenses, but you can always grow that revenue base. So when we think about driving revenue opportunities, and the team will talk to you a little bit later in the presentation around this, one of those ideas is how do you optimize the downtime of your assets? How do you make sure if you have a work truck that allows you to drive revenue and that work truck is not in service, how do you get that work truck optimized so that you can drive that revenue for your organization? Our second tip, and the way that we like to think here at Merchants, is to move quickly. Don't wait. Every day that goes by is a lost opportunity. And those small lost opportunities and sometimes big opportunities stack upon each other and really create a momentum that can do a lot of really great things in the long term for your organization. So a second tip that we'd like to think about and would like to leave with you is making sure that if you're thinking about the things that you can do to drive revenue or cut cost or optimize cash flow, move quickly, get that momentum. It can really make a difference in the long term. Another piece that we really think about is making sure that as you make decisions with your fleet, that you think about having that flexibility to move and change as our economy and the economics that we're dealing with are moving and changing just as quickly. So if we're thinking about, making those changes and moving quickly, think about being flexible with that, because you might be heading in one direction one day and an economic indicator can tell you that something else is popping. You want to be able to have that flexibility to move to where those opportunities are. And then I would leave you with our last, kind of tip or advice and thinking about, how do I take short-term actions and I have a long-term vision for where I'm going, is that, oftentimes just making surgical changes makes a big difference in being able to drive optimization or utilization of your fleet. And the wider spread changes that you make can sometimes have wider spread negative effects. So as you're looking to move with the market and with the economy and looking to, stabilize your fleet or optimize your fleet, think about making those quick surgical changes so that you're able to pivot when you need to whatever economic challenge you may be facing. And really what we're looking for, and I'll pass you off to my friend here, Stefan, here at Merchants, is that we really want to help you guys walk away with that partnership, that way that you can and think about working across your organization. How do you mitigate cost? How do you optimize cash flow? Those are going to be the key words and the key things that your organization's really going to be thinking about as we continue to work through these challenging economic times. And with that, Stefan.
Thanks, Kristen. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, how you beat inflation is very simple, right? You have to mitigate your costs, right? So it's all about the things that you can control. You find a way to mitigate your costs. You manage what you can measure already. You stretch your money, and then you infuse cash back into your business. So Christine talked about, revenue, right? What are the ways you can help your organization, generate revenue? You want to optimize your cash flow. You have a bunch of assets. You need to, optimize your lease assets. Are you using the right amortization term? Are you you're really utilizing your vehicles the way you're supposed to. And then you have to look into your programs, right? Anything from fuel, maintenance, and safety. And that's actually, those are very simple steps, it seems, but along the way, they will carry great benefits. So we'll talk about, optimizing assets. Okay. And there we go. Thank you. So we will talk about the first thing, you want to talk about the things that you can control, right? So if you think about a fleet, as a fleet manager, you have three buckets in general that you look at. You look at lease, you look at fuel, you look at maintenance, and then you have safety and all those other things. The key is, first of all, to always focus on those things that you can control, right? In this instance, for example, when you lease a vehicle, well, you can control how many vehicles you acquire. You can control to a certain extent the average cap cost, right? So you have different OEMs to choose from, right? Which ones for the same application, would you choose, right? And within that, you've got the OEM incentives, your FMC incentives, destination, a lot of things that you have to look at with enough consideration to make sure that you take your money as far as possible. Other things that you can control are your amortization terms. For example, we have clients who for the longest time have been used to use, amortizing their vehicles at 48 months, but it turns out they can't even turn a vehicle in after 48 or 54 months. So what do? They try to find a way with the new vehicles that they acquire to stretch the term, or with the vehicles that they have currently, try to lengthen the term so that at least they get some of the benefit of a lower lease payment. Okay, so a few things that you have to see. Anytime you look at your fleet operations, you have to look at the things that you can control and then the things that you cannot control, and always take targeted actions onto those things that you can control. So we'll talk about fleet optimization here and talk about why it's important, for example, to right-size your fleet, right? When you operate a fleet, you want to make sure that you have a fleet, whose size really matches your business needs. Do you have too many vehicles, right? So if you do, you have to get rid of those vehicles that are, in surplus. You have to find a way to reduce overhead, right? Do you need X amount of fixed vehicles, or do you need also pool vehicles? So you have to do the math and make sure that you have the right amount of vehicle, the right type of vehicle for your operations. You have to analyze your data. How many vehicles are staying idle all the time or most of the time? So make sure that you get, you reduce those, it's either by selling those that just won't be utilized, or just by reallocating across your fleet. You have to take advantage of the market as it is today. So with the current environment, with the economy, a lot of things are going on. It's a seller's market for most things, right? It's a seller's market for jobs. It's a seller's market for houses. It's a seller's market for vehicles. And the resale market is very strong to this day. So if you have a surplus of vehicles, I think now is the right opportunity to get rid of them, especially if you do not have a need for them, right? That's the key. And those things ultimately improve your organization's bottom line, because you don't want to be paying for an asset that's sitting on the, on the yard somewhere, not producing any revenue, okay? And then that can also help with your driver satisfaction. So many things that you can look at, but fleet optimization is the first step into combating inflation. We're looking at 7 to 9% inflation. On average, we're used to seeing 2%, right? So we have to take surgical action, make sure that we act appropriately. And here we have a small matrix, right? A quick matrix that can help you. For example, look at your portfolio of assets, right? You have assets with low mileage, you have assets with high mileage, and some of them with low utilization, some of them with high utilization. So you can try, very easily, and this is a matrix, among many others, right? You can see what works for you, but essentially it's a quick decision-making tool that can help you, decide, which assets to keep, which one to get rid of, which one to just watch, and maybe which one to reallocate and see, well, you've got vehicles here that are being utilized at a very low level, and they have very low mileage, but then we have a need in another division. So you can make those quick decisions, and that will help you decide with a good enough accuracy what you need to keep in your fleet. Okay. And then financing options. So we talked about leasing being one of the first buckets. It comes down to being flexible. You have to be careful when you decide on the lease term. We have some clients, we've seen, across, industries, organizations, fleet sizes that are bent on certain lease terms because, they don't like to carry debt and whatever sentiments they have towards it. But the reality is that we live in an environment where today, it's a bit harder to get vehicles. It takes a bit longer. If you are effectively keeping a vehicle for 60 months as opposed to the 48 that you are used to, maybe you want to make sure that the term that you get when you lease an asset is going to match the useful life of that asset, okay? I think it makes sense from that perspective. And if you have assets today that you feel like you can actually stretch because, well, the replacement vehicles won't come, before the next 12 or 18 months, then there's an opportunity for you to do the same thing. So what does that do essentially? Well, it reduces your payments, right? You get a credit, right away for amortization, for example, but it also reduces your payments because it's stretching the term, right? You go from 60 to 66 months, from 48 to 54 or 60 months. So you have a lower monthly payment. And if you're looking just to have a baseline reduction, then that's a good basis to start. And then you have to contemplate things like a sell and lease back, right? Sometimes you own assets, you own vehicles, and you may need revenue to do other things. You may need revenue even to lease new units, right? So look into your fleet, find the equity, right, if there is some, and take the cash out of those vehicles, and then you can fund other areas of your business. I think, Kristen said earlier, you have to think like a CFO, right? How do we maximize the allocation of cash? And that is the key, right? Your fleet is rich, very often. So when there's a chance to take out some of that equity to fund other areas of the business that will fund your growth, I think it's going to be one of those, cycles that just create, a lot of value creation. And with that, I will let James speak. He's going to talk about, what to do with your assets that you don't need at the moment.
Yeah, I'll make one comment on that, Stefan, on those two great examples, the re-amort and the sale and leaseback. And if you think about it, neither one of those situations is dependent upon getting new or used vehicles. So you can make a positive play and show your value to the organization with really your existing fleet and just taking advantage of either stretching out the term or changing the financing. I always look at that as well as kind of like refinancing your house, right? As rates go down, you refinance, your payments go down. We can really do the same thing with your fleet. So either that or taking advantage of any equity you have in that fleet and doing a sale and lease back if you own those vehicles. Those are both great ways to infuse cash back into the business. But when you have vehicles that are actually added and or not needed, what do you do with them? First thing I always say is do an analysis of the entire portfolio. See if you have an excess of vehicles in certain areas and maybe a deficit in others. And first thing you do is realign them to you make sure you're using as many of your assets as you can. So you're not just getting rid of them thinking they're not needed. So do that analysis first and then take advantage of the strong resale market that Stefan mentioned. If you sell off vehicles and you do determine that you do have a short-term need for them, there's solutions to that. There's programs like Fleet Ready, which are vehicles that are standardized pools of vehicles that can help match those needs if you have short-term needs. If you have a project that takes 6 months, there's no need to have a lease for 3 to 4 years to fulfill that 6 months that you need it. Instead, get a lease for 3 to 6 months. And that's what we call our variable fleet here. So it really supplements the pool of vehicles you have when you only need it for a short period of times. And to Stefan's point earlier, you don't want to have underutilized vehicles just sitting around for half the year. Find the right term to match what you need. And that's another option. We refer to it as Fleet Ready as our variable fleet. But when you do go to remarket, you have to look at all the options and kind of match the asset with the most optimal way to remarket it. You don't want to have vehicles like medium duty or Class 8 vehicles in front of buyers who are looking for sedans and SUVs. So it just won't bring optimal money. Same thing for light duty trucks. You want to match those with buyers that are looking for that exact kind of vehicle. That's how you drive up your selling costs. You could look at selling at auction. That's really where the majority of the sales happen. But there's also selling direct to buyers or dealers, and that helps you avoid a lot of the ancillary fees and selling expenses that you deal with at an auction. Think of eliminating the transportation costs because the buyer takes that. Think of eliminating any cost with reconditioning to put it through an auction. All that goes away, so you can save and drive down some of the expenses there. And then also think about selling virtually. You sell through an audience at an auction, and most likely it's the surrounding area, maybe the U.S. at best. But virtually, it's really the world where vehicles will be purchased and brought right out of the country. And then there's also programs like our Guaranteed Buy program, where really it's a upfront offer on day one to purchase a vehicle, and you get your payments in a couple days. It really gets you right out of the remarketing arena. Gives you a competitive price up front, and you don't have to worry about any instability in the market. We've seen a great uptick in the last couple of years, but the remarketing has kind of plateaued and started to go back down. So this avoids any of that on your behalf, and you kind of get out at a guaranteed paid price. It really takes out that instability. But overall, there's different options that are going to work for different companies. But really, I'd say the most important thing to do is put together a plan. Having a plan will help you reduce your expenses and optimize your proceeds for your remarketing assets. Go in with a plan. Don't just go in with hope. As we always say, hope is not a solution. Let's take a look at an example of one of the things that Stefan had talked about earlier.
All right, thank you, James. So if you have to think about inflation, right, and just a basic definition, inflation is just an increase in the cost of things, the CPI, Consumer Product Index. And so what it means is that your dollar just doesn't go as far as it used to. And in order to fight it, in order to beat it, you have to either find ways to get more cash in or to just reduce the expenses. So this is an example of something that we did with a client. It's a large, dental supply company with over 1,300 units. And they were just looking for liquidity, for some growth initiatives within the operation. But they could not reduce the size of the fleet. So how do you do that? How do you make money out of nothing, quote unquote? Well, the reality is that it wasn't nothing, right? So they had assets, and there are some assets where, there was still some equity there. And so what we help them do is just, determine within, their business, we identify a bunch of units that we could stretch, right, from where they were 50 months to 60 months. And so what that gave was a cash infusion to the client of $2.5 million and a monthly reduction in the monthly payment. So the way it works, quite frankly, it's not really rocket science or magic. You need money to fund your operations or to fund growth, and then we find it somewhere within something that you have, by your side. And this is something that we did, and this is something that we do constantly, because if a dollar, today is gets you only 2 peanuts, as opposed to a dollar getting you 5 peanuts before. Well, you got to find ways to get that money somehow, and this is one of the most organic ways, right? Without having to sell your assets, or without having to go and borrow from an outside source. You essentially borrowing against yourself. I think James mentioned again, it's like a bit of not quite a refinancing, but you take equity into something that you own, right? So with this client, we give them back $2.5 million so they could do whatever it is that they had to do, because an asset, a vehicle, is a tool. But for whatever growth initiative, if you have to think like a CFO, what else could you do with that money and at what rate of return? So those are ways for you to position yourself as a thought leader, but also as a strategic leader, right? As a financial leader, and extract the value out of those assets. Okay. And with that, I want to talk about, how to optimize, your fuel, your maintenance, and your safety spend. And it comes down to, data. I think that's where the key is, right? When you have, for fuel and maintenance, for example, when you have those fuel cards, right? You make sure that you can monitor the data, because it's one thing to have the data, but you have to use it, right? Ingest it, digest it, and make something out of it. You can set up protocols, you can set up alerts, right? For fraud, you can do a lot of things to make sure that, for example, especially in this environment, I mean, I was driving today, dropping off my son at school, and I live in Texas, and I saw gas prices at $2.89, and I smiled, right? But last month or 2 months ago, I was not smiling when I was going by a gas station. But in that environment, the level of fraud just increased significantly, right? So when you have a fuel program, you can set up those parameters to make sure that you can check any type of irregularities, right? So you have to monitor the data. For the vehicle data, you can gather, miles driven, right? The vehicle's miles traveled, engine hours, speed management, all those little things that have an impact on how you end up spending money, right? Does a vehicle go too fast? How does that impact your fuel spend? Does a vehicle idle too much? How does that impact your fuel consumption, right? All those little things, you get that data. And then from a, driver management perspective, you can look at, safety scorecards, MPG, hard acceleration, harsh braking, harsh cornering, all those things, and benchmark. The key here is really to get the data that you have, make sense of it, and drive decisions from it. And that is the way you will be able to save. But there's a lot of wealth into all the data as a fleet manager that you have when you have all those programs. It's a matter of making sense of it, putting it together, and taking action. Okay. And so it comes down to, again, being able to manage your data, right? And again, what is in management? If you can't see it, or if you can't see it, you can measure it, you can manage it, right? If you had the one platform where essentially, you could have all of your data with a normal stream, right? And you can see all your OEMs, all your vehicles, all your asset types in one place, then you can make decisions. Okay. So again, the focus here when you're trying to to fight inflation is to look at the things that you can control. If you look, for example, at fuel spent at large for a fleet is a function of two things, right? How much it costs and how much of it you buy, right? We cannot really decide how much fuel costs are. That's way too complex, especially for me. But at least we can make a decision. We can have an impact on how much fuel we consume. So you have to look, for example, in this decision tree here that you see, of my consumption volume, what can I help drive down, right? Vehicles miles traveled, maybe. MPG, maybe. Idling, maybe, right? Many things. How? You can look at, telematics for route optimization. You can start, putting into place protocols or programs for maybe a PUC, personal use charge, right? So that, the drivers that are taking the vehicles home and doing other things, maybe you can get some money back from it. From an MPG perspective, you have to decide again, what is the right type of asset for my fleet? Do I need to drive a 3/4 ton truck? Or can I live with a 1/2 ton truck, right? Driver behavior, are those guys speeding? Are they, doing all sorts of things that they're not supposed to do? And those are the things that we, or you as a fleet manager, can monitor, right? If you have all the data and maybe a telematics, device to start saying, well, this vehicle is idling 8 hours a day, and it's not in North Dakota during the winter, right? What's happening here? Take those decisions, and even a 2% decrease in fuel volume can help a great deal, especially, we've seen fleets here of, 5,000, 10,000 units, it makes a difference. And those are the little actions that you can take. And this is a decision tree that, you can build for yourself, look at and see what other parameters are, a function of how much you spend, and from there decide the things on which, you'll take action. So very simple, but you have to, again, focus on the things that you can control, right? Fuel prices at large, you have no bearing on, on what they are, but you can influence driver behavior which then can influence how far they drive, which then can influence how much fuel they consume. Okay, so a few things here and there that can help. So you have to look, savings, other opportunities as far as, the vendors, fraud prevention and employee management, exception reporting, real-time data. Always, get on a single platform where you can get all that data and understand exactly what the patterns are, what the behaviors are, what are the things that are out of the norm, right? Because the earlier you detect those things, the better you will be at actually setting policies and making sure that those policies are followed and enforced, so that you have a baseline, of where your spend needs to be, and a good understanding of how you can reduce it. Okay. So I'm going to take a sip of water here. I think I'm speaking a bit. Thank you. All right. So speaking of helping a client reduce their fuel spend, we had this large client who was always, we were challenged to help them reduce their fuel spend, okay, and also increase the driver productivity. And we had to look at the data, right? Look at the data in terms of, where are those vehicles going? Who is driving? Why they're driving a certain route? And looking at the data, we were able to help them reduce, on average, how far they drove, right? The distance, right? You can go to many places, or to the same place using different routes, but by optimizing the way they went about the business, we were able to reduce that. What it also does is, it helps reduce, engine hours. And reducing engine hours, it also reduces, how often you need to go to the shop. And so with this client, we ended up saving, about $35,000 annually, at least on an annual basis, for this specific client. So it's not necessarily the biggest thing that you need to do. It's the little initiatives that can help you really have an impact, right? And this is, on a small subset of assets, but just imagine that you do that for 1,000 assets or 5,000 assets, right? 10% reduction in VMTs, in miles driven, that's significant, especially if you drive, heavier type of vehicles. All right. Another thing, as far as fuel, so fuel is, again, looking at 2 months ago, everybody was going crazy, right? It was just crazy. Now, one great alternative to fuel, and I don't need to say it too loud, are electric vehicles. And it's for a lot of reasons, right? You have to look at cost, certainly. But we live in this environment today where it turns out everybody, or most everybody, agrees that, well, fossil fuels have some type of, negative impact on the environment. Now, electric vehicles are important in this whole conversation about inflation for a few reasons, right? We will talk about inflation, but I want to talk about maybe the ESG, the social governance initiatives that most organizations have today, right? Everybody can play their part in that. You have to look on the long term, right? As far as, cost, right? We talk about inflation. In the long term, total cost of ownership, electric vehicles, on average, turn out to be less costly to own and operate that gas-powered vehicles, right? And that comes due to the fact that, first of all, there's not going to be any fuel. There's still going to be an electricity charge, but not comparable to whatever we pay at the pump today. But also maintenance, right? Maintenance cost goes drastically down. And now you can actually look, there's so many companies today, whether it's the major OEMs or, those startups, or those startups that are backed up by the major OEMs. You have a flurry of models that you can choose from to actually maybe start a pilot just to see what it does to your fleet. And I think you can kill two birds with one stone doing that, right? You can definitely over the long term decrease your spend, but also have a positive impact on the environment. And we'll talk about a case that we did with a client, for example, to run a pilot on EV implementation. So this company, 1,700, compact pickups. So we're looking at the, Colorado Tacoma type, and they just wanted to see what it's like, right? So one of the biggest challenges today is education. Right? Education comes from, a lot of questions and very legitimate questions. One of those questions is, well, is there enough range? That's always the first question, because I don't want to be driving. I don't want my guys to be out there in the field and not be able to go home. That is one thing. The second question is always about, well, okay, there's range, but is there enough, network? There's enough data out there. There's over 47,000 charging stations today, public, right, where people can go and do that. So we had to educate. And so we gave the client a lot of material. We talked to them, we trained them, just so that they had an understanding of the things that were possible today. Now, is it something that's going to happen overnight for everybody? No. There's going to be a solution for everybody, certainly. But it's something that it requires, I think, a bit of courage to want to go down the path, because the questions are legitimate, but the answers are there. And for the answers that aren't there today, the solutions are being worked on. So as a result, with this company, for example, we were able to get a buy-in, from the drivers to senior leadership. And then we started an EV transition program with 40 units, right? So this is one of the many things that if you think about as a fleet manager, right, as a strategic leader, because I got to go back a couple of years, 2020, when you talk about essential workers, anybody who operates a vehicle is essential. So now you have a more strategic role in your organization, and you have this level of, visibility within your organization. Helping pilot an initiative like this can actually help you improve your company's PR, right? From an ESG reporting perspective, right? What are we doing that's responsible for society, right? So those are the few things that we can do. But going back to the inflation topic, right? The total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle at large, from like to like, always is lower than a fossil fuel powered vehicle. So as we're thinking about, I think Kristen talked earlier about like thinking short term, but also have some type of vision. Well, EVs are definitely part of the vision that as a fleet manager that you need to have, not just to check a box on the ESG and CSR box, marks there, but also because ultimately it will be a cost benefit to your organization. Okay, so the third bucket is maintenance. Always think about the things that you can control, right? Maintenance it can be complex. You have different types of vehicles, different types of repairs, a lot of things. As a fleet manager, very few things within maintenance are within your control. That's understandable. But a few things you can look at and make decisions, right? One would be the age of the vehicles in your fleet, right? How long do you keep those vehicles? And what does that mean for your organization, right? An older vehicle is going to go to the shop likely more frequently. An older vehicle, for example, is going to cost more to repair. An older vehicle very likely is going to go to the shop for repairs that take much longer. So if you look at the blue boxes here, then you'll see that, although you may not decide how many hours a mechanic works on your vehicles, the decisions that you make at the onset, deciding how long you keep vehicles, will guide all those drivers, right? If you keep your vehicle for 10 years, chances are it'll go to the shop for an engine repair at some point. That's going to cost you, and that's going to take a lot of hours. And you have to think like a CFO. You have to think like a strategic leader. a vehicle goes in for an engine, work that takes 48 hours. What does that mean to your organization? The downtime, right? The downtime, the lost revenue, the additional cost of maybe getting a rental to get that driver going. So those are the little things. And so the baseline here, as far as the things that you as a fleet manager can control, will be, well, how often do I keep the vehicles? Or rather, how long do I keep the vehicles? And then make sure that you have PM compliance in place, right? So you make sure that you say, well, every 5,000 miles, or now with newer vehicles, every 7 or 10,000 miles, we need vehicles to go to the shop to get the oil change, right? Because if you don't do that, of course, over the long run, it's going to be costly, because it's not going to be a simple maintenance transaction. Is going to be a repair, and probably an expensive one. So a few things that you can look at here and decide, how do I set policy as far as, vehicle cycling, right? How long do I keep vehicles? But also for the vehicles that I do have, what are the protocols that I put into place to make sure that my costs don't just go over the top? And so those are the things that you can control, and just, the very soft, right? The very soft, you can talk about soft power like they do in diplomacy, but those are things that once you decide on them, you will see they have an influence. Okay.
Stefan, this is one of the things that we've seen. Obviously, inventory has been tight over the years, last couple of years, and people are keeping their vehicles much longer than they had in the past. And one of the things we've been recommending a lot is, the quick lube oil services are great, but we got to start looking at ways where we can catch major concerns earlier. So, the most expensive repair is the one you don't know about, right? The one that leaves your driver on the side of the road waiting for a tow truck to come on in. So what we've been talking to our fleet managers a lot about is, hey, instead of that quick lube, which is a great service, skip that quick lube this time and get them into a full service shop where they can go through and do a 29-point inspection on it and maybe catch something that is starting to become a problem and fix it before it becomes a nightmare. Think of, that coolant hose, because it's been on there longer than you typically would normally keep a car. Now it's starting to crack and maybe it's starting to leak. Well, you can take care of that for $100 if you get it while you're in a full service repair shop. But if you don't, and it blows and you're on the side of the road, it could damage your engine. You could need a new water pump. And on top of a much more expensive repair, you have a tow service in there, as well as more downtime than you would if you just had got it take a look at, somewhere along the line during the year. So, what we're really saying is just look for ways to potentially catch early issues earlier than you normally would. And it's one of the ones where we're talking to a lot of our fleet managers about right now.
Yeah, that's a great point, James. Contextually, we have a very tough environment, right? It's harder to acquire vehicles. So the ones that you do have, you have to really make sure that they will stay on the road, up until you get something for certain that's going to come replace those vehicles. So it's very important to keep the compliance there, but make sure that you do the work so that preemptively, right, you identify those issues that down the road are going to cost you time and money. And those are two things that, quite frankly, no one, can afford to waste right now. So that work needs to be done, because, doing the things ahead of time, right, will help you. Will save you a headache. That's just the most basic way to say it. So that's a great point. And so just a quick success story, right? Downtime, so we had a client, operating light duty vehicles in a delivery application, and the maintenance span was twice the benchmark, so looking at, like for like fleets, twice the benchmark on average. So that's quite abnormal. Well, turns out we had to look at the PM policies, right? So you can set up a policy, but if you don't enforce it, it kind of defeats the purpose, right? You have to make sure that you go after those drivers, right? Whichever way you choose, it could be a gamification. But with this client specifically, we had to look at driver behavior, We had to look at driver behavior and also make sure that the policy that was in place made sense for the vehicle application, right? So you cannot have a sedan, all change policy, for a heavy truck or vice versa, right? So you have to make sure. And so with this client, we had to realign, make sure that, well, the policy that they had in place really made sense for the type of application of the vehicle. And as a result, we saw a good decrease in maintenance spend, and on average for this fleet, $4,800 annually. So it's always the little actions, right? Very targeted. You have to identify really what the root cause is of what that discrepancy or that disparity is, and address it in a way, and I think it's going to be consequential. You do it for 1 unit, you do it for 100 units, and then you'll see the fruit. So always be careful, make sure that you have the right policies, make sure that you have the right enforcement of the policy, and things will come, to play will come to play out the way they're supposed to. And then the one thing we don't talk about very often is safety, because, of course, it's not like a major cost component, but there's always a side of it, right? Insurance and all those things that come after. Most organizations have good safety policies. I think all organizations should have excellent standard policies. Now, here are just some numbers for you, right? Here are just some numbers. I'll get on the one with the dollars. Employers collectively pay $72.2 billion annually for vehicle crashes involving their employees. $72.2 billion, right? That could be your company. Safety is very important. And I'm going to say something here. It doesn't have to be a vehicle that's branded with your company's name. If one of your drivers is in a car on company business, your company may be liable, okay? So it's important to have programs in place for driver behavior management, right? It's important to have policies in place that will tell you what your drivers are doing, right? Speeding is a big concern. Seatbelt violations are a big concern. I see here seatbelts, if you wear a seatbelt, that reduces the risk of death by 60%, right? So what is one key to address that challenge? Well, telematics. Telematics is not a cure-all, but it saves a lot of headaches, right? With telematics, you have data and that can tell you that your driver is not wearing a seatbelt. That can send an alert to your driver to wear the seatbelt. That can send the driver's manager an alert that the drivers are wearing a seatbelt, right? To have a safety culture, you have to have the safety tools, right? So we had a client, insurance company, right? You would think that ran a pilot on on a connected vehicle solution, right? Connected, that means, OEM, ready to go with data feed. We could see for this client's data, we had a couple of troublemakers there, but you had this one driver who had 186 speeding violations over a 3-month period of time, right? That's 60 a month, that's twice a day. Maybe it's an average day for the guy, but that's excessive. And if you think of the probability of something happening, right, the likelihood of something bad happening, and then the cost of it, right? So those are the things that you want to address. You want to tackle head on, actually even before it happens, right? Safety training. So the solution for this client was to, get a scorecard, a safety scorecard, address the driver, right? Give him some training, right? And the reality is that telematics, people say, man lies, number don't. The data really doesn't lie, typically with telematics, okay? It's going to be in front of you. And very often people tell stories, but the data will be what it is. What we saw for this specific driver was a reduction, certainly not 100%, but we went from 186 events to fewer than 5, right? That's an improvement. And when it comes down to accidents, you don't want to look for the worst case scenario, but it's probability, right? If you increase the bad behavior, the odds of something bad happening are just going to increase. And so with this client, for example, for this specific driver, with some training, some coaching, and just like some monitoring, right, we were able to decrease that. And this is something that all fleet managers should take into consideration, because having a safe driver, is good for your organization from a revenue perspective, right? They're going to be productive. They're going to bring in money. It's also good from a reputation perspective, right? You guys aren't a company that's hiring drunkards and anything else, but it's also going to be good from a cost perspective because it's going to save you a whole lot of money and certainly a whole lot of trouble. So a few things that you can do, quite frankly, fleet, right? Your leasing, your fuel, your maintenance, how do you tie that into fighting inflation? Just look for the little things, right? Inflation is about cost mitigation and cash flow optimization, right? There's so many things that we cannot control today, right? With 8%, 9% inflation, it's hard. But the things that we can sit down and take a look at and say, what do we do to contain this? And so if you take these few steps, I think you'll be successful, maybe not in solving the whole inflation crisis in the world, but at least in addressing what needs to be done to make sure that your baseline of cost doesn't fluctuate too much from where it needs to be. With that, I think I'll give it back to Kristen. I think she's got a few things to say. We cannot hear you, Kristen, or maybe it's just me.
No, I think she's on mute.
Almost got through with the whole thing without a mute issue. I just wanted to say, thank you to our audience today, and Stefan, thank you, and James for your partnership that we have on a regular basis here at Merchants, and I hope all of you learned a lot today in those and the opportunities that they laid out for you. And really all I can encourage everybody to do in times like this is to partner across your organization, think about where you can drive value, take action, be surgical about it, and don't be afraid to take that first step, because that's going to do a lot of things for yourself as a fleet manager and make you look like a star to the rest of your organization. So thank you, everybody. And I think at this point, we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we did have some questions come in, so I'll get to those. Just going to pitch it to the three of you, and whoever thinks they can answer it best could jump in, because I'm not sure exactly who this one would go to. The data component is overwhelming. The person's fleet consists of telematics, GPS, and a few connected vehicles. Where's the best place to start when it comes to making sense of it all?
I'll take that question. So you want a single platform. Typically, that's the best answer that we can give, right? So find a provider, whether it's an FMC, that can integrate all that data, right? So a few companies out there, I'm not going to name them, but have platforms where we can essentially integrate data from different providers, right? I think to have a single source of data where you can whether you pull that data through API or whichever other means is a good way. You want your data in one place so that you're not looking here and then there, right? One place, so you can do that. Another tool that's out there, all those new data visualization tools, right? Whether it's Power BI or Tableau, if you can grab the data, as long as you know how to use it, those are great tools to utilize. But I'll say find a provider, an FMC, that will have a platform that can integrate all those third-party suppliers, and then that'll solve 90% of your problems.
Okay, great. That's some good detail there. Another question, I think maybe James or Stefan can answer this one. Supply chain issues and delays are out of my control, but what is the best way to approach planning in today's market?
Well, first thing I'd say is plan very early. Start that process way earlier than you would have ever thought. A lot of the supply chain issues around new vehicle orders, the quicker you get your orders in, the quicker you know what you need for the coming year, the better chance you have at actually getting that fulfilled. If you wait and you get into the year, quite often, a lot of the times, the vehicles can no longer be ordered. And that kind of goes true with what I also said about maintenance. Supply chain issues are somewhat out of your control. So we want to make sure that we're looking to take care of preventative stuff up front and identify issues early. So I think the number one thing is time. It's never too early to start planning for the future. And if you don't start your planning now, us as an organization here at Merchants, we already have next year planned out. We're going through that process. We're through that process. You should start looking at your fleet and your needs now for next year and starting that early approach.
Okay, great. Thanks. Another question for you. I'm not exactly sure again who this one will go to, but I'll throw it out there. Person operates a snowplow business in the winter and a tree and shrub business from the spring to the winter. They have different vehicles and they do different tasks. Mileage daily is low and most vehicles are paid for. So when is the right time to lease versus purchase? Sorry, it's a little wordy there, but I think you get the point.
Well, you have to do your analysis and decide, right? So what is the cost of leasing, right, for that period that you're very busy? If I read again, winter. And so what would it cost you you have to look at your options. Do you want to lease? Do you want to rent? Or do you want to own, right? Those vehicles that you own at the moment, they're worth something. But apparently they sit idle for about 8 to 9 months a year, right? Unless you live in North Dakota and maybe it's just 7 months a year because there's 5 months of winter, right? So you have to see what is the value of having those assets sitting there and not producing any revenue, and what else could you do with that money? So those questions, I mean, we have to see the data to give like a specific answer, but the math needs to make sense in that, do I want to really waste this, right? Because those assets that you keep, they're going to lose value, with time anyway, right? So what else could you be doing with the money that's not going to cost you that equity?
Yeah, and I would say what's interesting about that one, Stefan, just to build on that for a minute, is that, it's not just the lease versus purchase model. The rental option is there for you too. And sometimes when you think about renting and that might have that higher payment in that month or 2 months or 3 months than you would be paying in a lease or a purchased asset. Again, back to what Stefan said, look at the math. And you might find that if you're only using that asset for that 3-month period of time while you're snow plowing, but it sits idle for the rest of the season or the rest of the year, that might be a much, much better option for you to do that on a short-term rental or a short-term lease basis versus a long-term lease or purchase.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, those are some great things to think about to answer that question. Well, I just want to say that's all the time we have for today. Just want to remind anyone who asked a question that didn't get answered, we will be following up via email to answer your question individually. We hope that you all enjoyed today's webinar. I want to again thank James, Stefan, Kristen, and Merchants Fleet for today's presentation. I also want to mention that this webinar will be available on demand on the Automotive Fleet website, and that's at automotivefleet.com/webinars. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.